Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Scott, and today I'm going to talk to you about effective founders, specifically the 7 leadership strategies to overcome the biggest risks to your startup success. Why? Well, engineering is easy and people are hard. One of my favorite quotes, and I think it holds true for all of my founders out there, because a lot of times founders forget to focus on one of the hardest parts of starting a company: the people. People related issues and problems are the biggest risks to funded startups. 55% of startups that fail report that the reasons behind that failure stem from the management team. Specifically, some of the leading people problems include co founder conflict, hiring and retaining talent, poor decision making and prioritization, and a reluctance to make tough decisions on team members. We studied the most and least effective founders in a data set of over 1,000 companies and really teased together what do the most effective founders do well that the least effective founders do not. And luckily for us, we found that the most effective founders use these 7 leadership strategies that I'm going to talk you through today. The first, the most effective founders treat people like volunteers. What do I mean when I say treat people like volunteers? Well, the most effective founders are able to get others to feel that they share the same vision or purpose, much more so than the least effective founders. You can also see that they're able to lead by inspiring people. And finally, they're able to help the team understand what they personally gain by working hard towards the success of the startup. And this leadership style is universally important across countries and across industries. Again, as you can see on the slide, depending on if you're in a developing economy or an emerging ecosystem, still holds true. Also, engineering dominant tech verticals also share the same trait as operations dominant tech verticals. So, how do you build a talent monopoly? Well, you build a talent monopoly by understanding what attracts the best people and motivates them to excel. Firstly, good people are drawn to hard, meaningful mission. The best people want to work on the hard problems that matter. Great work is a result of discretionary effort. Productivity is unlocked when people work passionately and are given space to pursue their goals. And as a leader, paying a person's salary doesn't excuse poor behavior. There's absolutely no excuse for being disrespectful or disingenuous, and this will have a downside for your business. And finally, remember, good people have options. Honestly, the best people don't really need to be working for you. So you have to remember that people leave bosses, not companies. Next on our list of most effective traits of founders: protecting the team from distractions. The most effective founders are seen to, one, invest their time in what really drives the success of the business. Two, they're able to keep the team focused on priority deliverables and objectives. However, this holds true, and this might apply to you. CEOs are still seen as easily distracted. 42% are seen by their teams as distracted by new ideas or projects, or what I call the bright and shiny objects. So, if that applies to you, think about how you can build a team that does amazing work by engineering for positive momentum. And what do I mean by that? Well, you want to first inspire by having creative, exciting, hard, meaningful goals. Second, you want to make sure that the team keeps focus on those priorities. Third, you want to make sure that you're clearly communicating expectations, which we'll get into later. And all of this will then allow you to achieve high quality results through the team, creating momentum and a flywheel that builds both your performance and your morale. So, some tactics to keep your team focused. Well, first and foremost, make sure you're protecting their time. Be mindful of executive magnification. What is the impact of that email that you sent at 11 p.m. saying, hey, can you check into this? Or that Slack message that you sent at 1 a.m. saying, "Oh, wow, we should investigate." Think about the weight of your words as a CEO and as a leader within your organization, and make sure you're not derailing focus by distracting with the weight of those words. Second, make sure that you create project burial rituals. Ultimately, many startups tend to be working on things that are not priorities for far too long. Make sure you have a way to say, hey, we've tested this. This is no longer a priority for our company. We've officially buried this initiative, and we're going to focus on our top priorities. Finally, make sure you plan for recovery. Very important in these times, especially. Avoid burnout in your team by making sure that you're intentional about recovery. The third trait of most effective founders is minimizing unnecessary micromanagement. And I say unnecessary because some situations, of course, do call for micromanagement, but not all of them. Micromanagement is sometimes needed when there's a new team and they need more initial guidance, or they have really ambitious goals, or those goals take high coordination and it's really high stakes work. However, most of the time, it's not truly necessary, especially when you have a highly capable team. You have clear goals and metrics, and that work is really well documented in terms of how they're going to achieve the objective. And our data suggests messaging is much more of a derailer for CEOs than other functional leaders. So, if you're a CEO, be careful of your micromanagement. In particular, you want to make it a goal to minimize unnecessary micromanagement so you can scale yourself. Because ultimately, you should minimize the time you're spending on micromanaging so that you can maximize the time you're spending on scaling yourself and scaling your business. So maybe you're inherently a micromanager. How do you know when to micromanage? Well, here's a checklist. First, are you clear on which goals to pursue? Is the team clear? How interdependent is the work of the team? Third, how capable is the team to make good decisions and operate independently? Fourth, how much trust is there to resolve conflicts amongst the peers? Fifth, how geographically dispersed is your team? Sixth, how much deadline pressure exists? And does it require quick decision making? However, one criteria should never be how critical is a product or feature or project, because ultimately, if you've made sure that you've set clear goals and made sure that everyone is supported in a way to be successful, then they should be able to handle a critical project without your micromanagement. So, minimizing unnecessary micromanagement, well, think about a few actions to consider. First, is your team over reliant on you? And if so, think about how you can refrain from sharing your point right away in a meeting and maybe ask, what have you thought of doing? You might be surprised that your team is already thinking of the same thing that you are. Secondly, think about how you can set the destination or North Star, as I call it, but have them actually lay out the path. And then finally, if you are, again, the type of person that really needs the confidence that your team is moving in the right direction, make sure you've set the right and necessary check ins as well as metrics so that you can feel confident that everything is proceeding without you needing to micromanage in the weeds. Fourth on our list of traits of most effective founders is inviting disagreement. This is one that I think is very underestimated in terms of the importance. And so I will say it again, make sure that you know how to invite disagreement as a leader within your organization. How important is it for founders to invite disagreement? Well, if you ask co-founders and employees, 42% of them say inviting disagreement is actually an important factor in being an effective leader. And they actually look to their leaders to invite disagreement within their organization. However, if you ask the founders themselves, only 3% report that it's important to be able to invite disagreement as an effective leader of their organization. Yet we know from our data that effective founders consistently invite disagreement. They value the perspectives of others, even if they differ from their own, and they invite others to disagree. So, though it might not always feel that way, disagreement amongst diverse teams actually leads to better outcomes. When surveyed on the perceived effectiveness of a group, folks that are socially similar always, always perceive their effectiveness more highly than those that are socially diverse. However, when looking at the same group of individuals, those that are socially diverse actually perform better. So, how can you invite disagreement without being disagreeable? First, think about how you can anticipate sources of disagreement. I like to put my founders through tough questions, thinking about how they can work through certain issues ahead of those issues becoming prevalent and present for their company. Second, I like to make sure that they talk about the elephant in the room. How can you tackle issues head on by asking each employee, maybe anonymously, to write down what they consider to be an issue that everyone is aware of, but no one really wants to talk about? And then finally, make sure you beat groupthink. And I like to use this 2-minute hack to do so. At the start of all my meetings, I like to ask team members to write down their position before discussing it so that then you're able to see where that disagreement lies and discuss those things up front. 5 on our list of 7 effective traits of founders: preserving interpersonal equity. Ultimately, unmet expectations cause majority of founder conflict. Our data suggests that many founders do actually keep track of their co-founders' duties, but have a major blind spot when it comes to their own. Specifically, when founders are evaluating themselves, they equate effective leadership with maybe one of 33 capabilities. Specifically, effective leadership is only about inspiring the team. However, when they evaluate their other co-founders, they on average equate effective leadership with 17 of 33 capabilities, including inspiring the team, collaborating effectively, mentoring others, staying focused. And so this expectation asymmetry often leads to a breakdown in the co-founding team itself. You start with the founder who has a minimalist expectation or definition of their own leadership role. Then you have these bigger implicit expectations placed on the founder by their co-founders. Then, of course, because they were implicit, the founder doesn't meet these implicit expectations and inevitably fall short. And then ultimately, the co-founders don't feel that their partnership is fair. So, how can you regularly check on your co-founding team's interpersonal equity? Well, I like to start with 3 pretty easy questions. Starting by asking myself, how satisfied am I with what I contribute as compared to what my co-founders contribute? How satisfied am I with what I receive in terms of rewards, whether that be monetary or otherwise, as compared to what my co-founders receive? And of course, how fair do I feel this partnership is overall? By making sure that you ask these questions to yourselves and that your co-founders ask these questions, and then you discuss these things, you're able to really identify where are there gaps when it comes to interpersonal equity within the team. So make sure you discuss and document expectations regularly because, of course, things change. I often like to use Google's Founders Users Guide that helps understand and clarify expectations across founding teams. Also, make sure you're monitoring in personal equity periodically because, as I mentioned earlier, things change. Sometimes something can be really important to you today that's not that important to you a year from now. And then, of course, something that is often neglected amongst teams is discussing hypothetical breakup scenarios. What happens if the startup fails hypothetically due to a co-founder conflict? What would those conflicts be? What are they most likely to be? How do you mitigate that from happening? Think about those questions ahead of time so that you can anticipate points of conflict in the future. Number six might sound obvious, but the most effective founders keep pace with expertise. What do I mean by that specifically? Well, having enough expertise allows leaders to identify opportunities to develop people's skills in their career, whether it be projects or potential mentors or trainings. They also allow you to invest time and effort in developing the skills of others. And 93% of the most effective founders have the expertise, whether it be coding, closing sales deals, finance, to effectively manage the work of the team. So do your homework to stay ahead of your industry. Make sure you know enough to know what skills to hire for, and make sure that you're getting the right candidates from your candidate pool. Make sure you source mentors for yourself and for your team from your network, and surround yourself with the right advisors as your company grows. Then finally, be selective. Your time is valuable and your team's time is valuable. Make sure that while networking can be important and that startup event can be fun, or that conversation with that coffee chat with that VC can be potentially an opportunity, not all events or coffee chats or opportunities to network are equally helpful or equally relevant for you. So make sure you're prioritizing your time and being selective. Finally, the most effective founders are able to overcome discouragement. While the most founders expect to gain self confidence along with experience, data suggests that the most effective founders are actually less confident and more prone to discouragement than the least effective. And this type of personal humility or underconfidence has been studied pretty extensively as the Dunning Kruger effect. What is the Dunning Kruger effect? Well, you might understand or empathize with this, but earlier in your journey, when you know very little about something and a problem, you might think, oh, this is easy. Oh, we can do this. But as you start learning more, sometimes that confidence tends to go down. You realize that problem is a little bit harder than you thought, right? A little bit more challenging. This is going to be a long road. And interestingly enough, even as you progress and become more of an expert in space, it usually never actually reaches that initial point of confidence in terms of how confident you are that you can solve this problem or that you know everything about this problem. Because experts tend to know that there's a lot that they don't know. So make sure that you're remembering that perfect confidence is granted to the less talented as a consolation prize. I love this quote by Robert Hughes, and I think it applies to most founders. And discouragement and underconfidence can sometimes warp reality and create mental responses in a number of ways that you should be on the lookout for. First and foremost, catastrophizing, and when you sometimes might disproportionately react to a disappointment turning into a bigger issue than it need to be. Or overgeneralizing, when you assume that this period of discouragement is just the latest in a future of ongoing discouragement. Or perhaps overpersonalizing, when you blame yourself for everything, even situations outside of your control. Or maybe over externalizing, when you blame external factors for everything, even when you did actually contribute to the eventual outcome. The most effective founders actually use three pretty important strategies to overcome this discouragement. First and foremost, focusing on the positive. Second, disclosing weaknesses. And of course, seeking help. Make sure that you see the positive in people and situations and events more often than you see the negative, because I'm sure that there's a lot of positives of what you're doing and in your journey. Secondly, be honest about your own strengths and weaknesses. And of course, make sure you're asking for help in challenging situations. Struggling with overcoming discouragement? Well, first, make sure you're building no BS relationships. Make sure you create a circle of trust, perhaps with fellow founders, maybe inside or outside of your industry, such that you can have honest, no ego conversations. And particularly be able to listen to each other, maybe when you're being too hard on yourselves or when you're simply wrong. Make sure you remember that confidence doesn't equal competence. And confidence, while it can be the unspoken currency in decision making, You can also foster a team culture that prioritizes strong opinions weakly held rather than weak opinions strongly held. And finally, make sure you remember to help someone else, particularly other founders. Why? Well, maybe in helping other founders, you'll realize that you actually knew more about that industry or more about this company than you thought you did. And it'll help you remember that you are also deserving to be there as a founder. Secondly, you are able to pay it forward and help someone else remember that they too are deserving to be there as a founder. Thank you.